Now let's move on to discussing forecasting, and specifically how we forecast epics on what I'll describe as a near-term roadmap. Why did we forecast at all? Let's not be silly about this. We have the ability now with SAFE to have increased adaptability, faster response time to changing market conditions. Why forecast anything? Well, I think those of you who are viewing this know we have to forecast. And the reason is we're not an island unto ourselves. We have partners, we have customers, and even we as an Agile team, we need to know. You know, I work for Scaled Agile Inc. We have a plan for the year. It'd be silly not to have a plan for the year. We've got a forecast of some products and services and some changes to the framework we'd like to make. People are dependent upon that. Our partners are dependent upon that. Some customers are directly engaged in providing feedback for some of those new initiatives, and we need to have some sense of the future. Not a locked and loaded software requirement specification that tells what we're going to build over the next year, but some reasonable sense of where we're going. And therefore, we need effective Agile forecasting. It's a key economic driver. We can't skip forecasting and say, we're Agile now, not sure what we're going to build in the next 2 weeks or the next PI. We have to have something better than that. We need a forecast and we need a roadmap. Solution visions are how we translate that. Solution vision says, okay, given the strategy, we're going to create the solution visions that define and track that strategy, and that's part of our forecasting process as well. The roadmap, that captures our strategic intent in forecasted deliverables and milestones. So we have some tools to support that. We haven't really talked about kind of the estimating part of planning, but here are things that we can use. We know we can describe the vision. We have, even before that, we certainly have our epics and lightweight business case for the big stuff. We know we have roadmap constructs to capture strategic intent. So let's figure out how to do that. To build a roadmap, we're going to have to do some estimating. But we don't want to do our traditional, project breakdown, work breakdown structure and take that down to the task level because, well, probably not going to do all that. They're going to be the wrong tests, and it's going to be highly precise and completely inaccurate. So we want a fast, efficient, and reasonably accurate way to do that. We need to be able to support what if. Oh, this is way bigger than a bread box. This one's relatively smaller. Okay, what if we did this one first? If we don't have any idea of the scope of those initiatives, we can't possibly do that. Our traditional way doesn't really help us because we tend to bind ourselves to big upfront design, right? What is a work breakdown structure? It says, what is the work and how does the work break down to essentially the task level? You know, the smallest node is the task and some individual bids a task. Goodness, what's it take to do that? I haven't built the system yet, but I've identified every task that I'm going to use to build it. That's just folly. What a silly approach to attempting to predict the future down to the task levels. We don't want to do that. We need a better path than that. We need a different approach. Let's talk about that different approach. So how do we estimate epics in SAFE? Well, it's not so difficult. We have the Kanban system where these potential epics are reviewed. And during the process of review, they get broken down into features. Teams can estimate features pretty well. Why? Because they have history and because they know what a story point is and they know what it costs. They know how many points it took to do a feature like that. These are fairly decent sized feature. 90 story points, 20 stories, something like that. That's pretty reasonable. Here's an enabler that's a little bit bigger. They know how to do that. And they estimate them in story points. Now, they can ask the teams for that data. They can go down to, if you will, the leaf node. Rarely they have to. We have experience, we have fiduciaries and product management and system architect level, and they understand history and relative size and will only engage the teams when necessary. Why? Because estimating doesn't create code, right? It's work for sure, and it creates a certain amount of value, but it's certainly not code. So I don't get this out of the process. I get some value of abstract or undefinable intangible value, if you will, but I certainly don't get code. So I don't want to estimate anything more than's necessary. And I can get to the point where if we get the initiatives right, there's not much estimating that happens at the team level. They simply quickly put estimates on their stories and story points, move through and adjust their capacity. So we want to get away from kind of individual/team level estimating. We only want to do that when necessary. We don't know how to do that enabler. It might be 500 points. Okay, let's put in some spikes and a few research activities over the next PI or so and come to a conclusion as to what we're going to do with that. Now, when I have the features, I actually have the epic. So do we really estimate the epic? Well, maybe. Kind of depends on your prowess and how far along you are on your journey. But it's pretty law of large numbers. But this epic now is composed of these features. So I would call this, imprecise, but fairly accurate, right? And it's accurate because it's based upon the actual history of people doing work of that type. It's based upon the actual physics of software development. A team can deliver so many story points in a period. That's just a fact. We've normalized that work. We saw very briefly earlier how you normalize that work, so the estimating is a lot of like. And now I can get the epic estimate back into the lightweight business case. Now, how do I translate stories to cost? Not as hard as you might think. With a small amount of work in terms of normalized estimating, you can very quickly determine that on average in a PI, a team delivers the following number of story points. And on average in a PI, that team costs us X. And you divide and you know the dollars per story point. We don't bother the teams with that, but it's something that we have to translate to. We have to know that 140 points in India might mean one thing and 110 points in the UK might mean something slightly different because the labor costs are different. But these are points, these are normalized, so are these. These have a different cost basis. My cost in India is different than my cost in the US. But we can do that fairly readily, and it doesn't take a rocket science accountant to be able to handle that problem. Now we have really the ability to do something that we know we needed to do, we just didn't know how we were going to be able to do that in Agile. And that's as follows. Given knowledge of the sizes, because we've done that, right? We've estimated these epics. And given knowledge of the capacity, story points per PI per art, we can start to reason about things. Now you might think, well, we're good to go. Let's just pretend like for a second that we don't need any of this. Pretend like I hadn't shown you that. And say, well, we can figure out how to deliver stuff. Well, I'm sorry, you can't. Because what we know is that this is 5,000 points. We don't know who's going to do it. And, but they have the capacity of 1,000 points per PI. Well, yeah, is that the only thing they're going to do? What about maintenance? What about their existing customer demands? What about all that stuff? So you can't make this part of the system go away. This is the capacity allocation. So now we can decide, based upon a capacity allocation, which trains can do the work and what percent of their capacity can be applied. So if this train could do exclusively this guy and only this guy, which is an unlikely case, it's just a pretend case, how long would it take this train, this art, if you will, to do this enabler epic? Well, it's pretty simple. It would take them 1 PI. What if I gave them a 50% capacity allocation? It would take 2 PIs. Goodness. All of a sudden you can reason about large-scale initiatives in an agile fashion, and you can have a better forecasting mechanism than we ever had with our kind of project management-centric work breakdown structures and work being bid by others. This work is estimated by the people doing the work. It's estimated in story points based upon actual, the only currency they need. It's vetted and validated kind of at the program, the art level by product managers. It's imprecise, but fairly accurate in the law of large numbers. And given now I know the productive capacity of the teams, we have the ability to do a level of forecasting that we never did before. Now, it took us a while to get here. I apologize for the fact that we had to understand a lot of things like story points and PIs and arts and epics and enablers and capacity allocation to do that, but we're here. And once we're here, we've reached a really interesting state, which is we have a much higher ability to forecast work reliably through portfolio work than we ever had before. Think about that. We just said that we have enhanced ability to forecast the future in our lean agile paradigm versus our traditional waterfall paradigm. That's powerful. It's also true. So here's a quick exercise for you. I kind of already did it. It's not going to be that hard. If Art 2 is capable of doing Epic 5 by themselves, but they can only dedicate half of their capacity, how long might it take? A very simple calculation. All it's doing is getting you to think about this art capacity allocation, and the size of the epics. Those are the 3 things we need to know. We need to know the size, we need to know the capacity allocation, and of course the who is part of capacity allocation, and we need to know the velocity of those arts per PI, and you can get that job done. So that's it for this lesson, Building the Agile Portfolio. Hopefully, in this lesson, I've helped you understand how to use strategic themes, connect a portfolio to the enterprise strategy, such that the portfolio is a reflection on the strategy, and it does its part in helping the enterprise achieve its overall mission. We talked about how to identify the enterprise value streams in a portfolio. We didn't identify them as such. We talked about the mechanisms in which you think about them. That's a thing that has to happen in your environment. It is in your start to Lean Agile transformation, even picking an artist depending a little bit on understanding the flow of value. We talked about how to advance the solution behavior with portfolio epics, those big cross-cutting initiatives, the big things that will really take us off our feet, if you will, if you haven't done a good job of analysis and understanding how they're going to be implemented. We started talking about the transition from project cost accounting to Lean Agile budgeting, and we also had some caveats about exactly when the time is to have that conversation. And finally, we talked about how you can forecast epics on a near-term roadmap. Together, this gives you the ability to run a portfolio in a far leaner fashion. Now, there's some dependencies. You have to have agile teams. You have to have agile release trains. But given that, this thinking around the value stream and around the portfolio will really allow you to unlock some of the more strategic initiatives and have a much leaner process for determining and deploying strategy in your enterprise portfolio.